This semester in several of my classes we talked a lot about Buddhism, philosophy, and teachings, and I really enjoyed it. I think I'm Buddhist, actually. So I wanted to explore it more, and especially how it's influenced Korean philosophy and just the Korean way of life. All right, so Buddhism in Korea, the Buddhist influence. According to a census in 2005, 1 in 4 Koreans identify as Buddhist in the religious sense, meaning that they adhere to it. However, a larger part of society is actually influenced by Buddhist philosophy and customs. I've heard or read a couple of reports that it suggests possibly 70%, but I argue that basically everyone in Korea is influenced by Buddhism in one way or another. That's because it's influenced the philosophy, literature, education, society, arts. It's influenced all parts of Korean life and is deeply rooted into Korean society. So let's look quickly just at the basics of Buddhism. It's how to live the good life. The facts, it originated from India, which is modern-day Nepal, in the 5th century. Buddha, or the Enlightened One, he was a prince who left his palace to go see his subjects, and while he was out in the world, he realized that there's a lot of suffering and pain, and this was obviously a new concept to him, and he wanted to understand why, and dedicated his life to that, and that's where we get the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. Four Noble Truths, quickly, is just basically that suffering exists in this life, and basically that we can overcome it, and that's through the Eightfold Path. And this picture or illustration depicts that. The 8 different things that we have to do to overcome it and rid ourselves of the suffering. All right, so the spread of Buddhism, as you can see here, it started in the Himalayan region and spread throughout Asia, particularly Eastern Asia. It did so because it's tolerant of all belief systems, which is perhaps why it's able to conform to Juche ideas. I don't know, in modern day we can see there's Buddhist Christians, Buddhist atheists, Buddhist everything, Buddhist Mormons, me, I'm a Buddhist Mormon. Because of this, there are many types of Buddhism, and in each region here, everywhere that spreads to, it's a little bit different. There's a different emphasis placed on Buddhism in the particular region. That's because of different customs and culture, different parts of the region. But one thing that is consistent is that the Dhamma, or the truth, is the same. The Four Noble Truths, all that is the same in all parts of Buddhism. All right, so Buddhism was introduced into Korea in 372 AD. At the time, shamanism, which we talked about earlier, was the main religion in Korea, and it's the native religion to Korea. And so it took all aspects of the Chinese influenced Buddhism and the Korean shamanism, and it created something very unique, the Korean Buddhist ideas and ideals. All right, so looking at Buddhism in the Three Kingdoms period. So I was actually surprised to learn this, and I think it was this book actually. It talks about the two, so Buddhism in Korea, the history and culture of it. It talks about 2 possible transmission stories. I had always assumed that it just came through China, and it did. But it suggests that there's actually another transmission by sea. It came from India directly to Paekje and then spread through the Korean peninsula. However, it's most likely that it did come through China and worked its way down the peninsula. All right, looking at Buddhist culture in Korea, Buddhism was essential to the Three Kingdoms. It brought culture to the Three Kingdoms, and through its temples, artwork, statues, and many argue that is the foundation of society during that time, and also that is the basis for unification that unified the peninsula. Looking fast forward to the unified Shilla period, in 668, the Shilla Kingdom unified the peninsula, as I mentioned, and during this time, Buddhism was protected and flourished. It did so until the Joseon dynasty. It flourished the Koryo dynasty, and it wasn't towards the end that Buddhism actually became corrupt. And that's one of the main reasons that it was persecuted was because of the corruption. And then also because during the Joseon dynasty, the huge emphasis on Confucianism, particularly Neo-Confucianism, which kind of took away different Taoist and Buddhist ideas that originally influenced Confucianism. However, despite this, many people still believed in Buddhism, including the kings and rulers, which just is evidence of the deep Buddhist roots in society then and today. All right, quickly, this is a refresher. We're familiar with this, but some of the most important contributions to Buddhism that Korea has made are these images that we're familiar with. The three jewels of Buddhism are Buddha, Dharma, the scripture, and the Sangha, which is the monkship, I guess. So throughout Korea, there's several Buddhas. This one being the most famous. We spent a lot of time looking at that at the Guksa temple in Gongju. And then, of course, the scripture, the Tripitaka Kriana, which was 81,000, what's it called? Print.
Wood blocks.
Wood blocks, and then the whole print culture in Korea. And then looking at the Sangha, there's all the Korean rituals and things that are uniquely Korean to Korean Buddhism. All right, then looking at modern Buddhism, the Joseon dynasty ended, and that was part of the Japanese colonial period. And during that time, there's kind of a rebirth of Buddhism, but it was obviously very influenced by Japanese Buddhism. And one of the things was there's kind of a movement away from celibacy of monks, and the clergymen were able to take on wives and whatnot. After Korea gained its freedom again, there's a great revival of Korean Buddhism, and they moved back to the traditional Korean Buddhist beliefs. And then these are just the three books that I read. This actually is probably my favorite one that I mentioned earlier. It gave a really good chronological history and a lot of really interesting facts. And that's a quick rundown of Buddhism in Korea.
Thank you. Ruby has a question.
I'm like always the question asker during like presentations. What was the corruption in the dynasty?
It was mostly with the Korean aristocrats, just kind of like abusing. I guess it could be. So, like, are you familiar with some examples of it?
Well, a couple things about it. Well, number one is the Buddhists would argue that there wasn't that much corruption, and that it's the Neo-Confucian histories that wrote it up and used it as an excuse to purge them. But the corruption, the core of the corruption, the charges are interference with politics and not acting like monks. And their estates were huge and rich, and so that was the reason for taking them over at the end of the Koryo period.
Mm.
But I think Buddhist scholars would argue that it's mostly cast from the Confucian point of view.
It's fabricated stories.
But having said that, in recent times, just within this last year, there was a big scandal in Seoul with a monk taking all kinds of money and a big fight among the monks once they discovered it. So there is an aspect of corruption. Well, bless their hearts, Korean Christians have these great fights over control of the churches and the money that they use, that sort of thing as well. So only the Confucians are pure.
Yes. Awesome.
Thank you.